Good morning. It is what time? 10:38 a.m. on Sunday, October 27th, 2019. I'm Christiana Ellis and I just got up. This is 5 more minutes. It's Sunday, so that means that I am continuing my rewatch of Cowboy Bebop with session 7. I'm pretty sure. Yes, 7 Heavy Metal Queen. One just additional note, you'll notice the overlay on the screen today. That's because on November 2nd and 3rd, I am participating in Extra Life, which is a charity that benefits children's hospitals. And I'm going to be running 24 hours of Dungeons and Dragons, two days worth. So 12 hours Saturday, 12 hours Sunday. I'm going to be running a game based on the Acquisitions Incorporated source book, and we're taking pledges to benefit children's hospitals, as I mentioned. So please check out the link, and I hope we can count on your support to help us for raise money for a good cause. And then you can check out my Twitch stream Saturday and Sunday, where we'll be broadcasting the game live. But today we're here to talk about Heavy Metal Queen, which, in a great show of Cowboy Bebop, that is. This is a favorite episode of mine. It's just so full of wonderful character and detail. It's, perfectly illustrative of all of these episodes. That, like I mentioned last week, that this show has a lot of episodes that are what we might describe as filler in other shows. But instead, it's really like the beating heart of Cowboy Bebop is really not that sort of A plot. It's really just these people just wandering through other people's problems, kind of just trying to make their way, but just encountering all of these other little micro stories, and it's wonderful. And so in this episode, we meet VT, who is just a wonderful character. I love her so much. She and her cat Zeros, and we see, so she's a space trucker, right? It makes perfect sense that in a spacefaring society, you're going to have a lot of freight. And so to spin it all as like big rig truckers is a lot of fun. And so VT is just, she's great. She's brassy, she's tough, but she is not, she's not even really like a tomboy type of character, right? She's a little older, she's a little heavier. She's not like some willowy pretty thing, but she's awesome. And so we meet her coming into this station, and we learn about this running theme about everyone only knows her by her initials, VT. Nobody knows her real name. But there's this whole thing where people are making bets about trying to guess her real name. And so like they have to put down 100 wulongs or whatever the actual bet is. And she's got a whole big stack of all of the money she's won from people trying to guess her name and getting wrong. And so basically the idea is, you put some money down, and if you're wrong, she adds it to her stack. But if you're right, you get the stack, right? Like that's the whole idea. But it's obvious too by the fact that she still has this stack. She's not spending the money. Maybe it's there in case of an emergency or something like that. But it means that it is not about money for her, right? She could just, like, for her to be maintaining this stack, right? She doesn't need the stack. It's just a fun thing. It is part of her, just her eccentricities, her character, and it's wonderful. She's awesome. I love her so much. And so she travels to a little diner and observes that it's full of unfamiliar faces, and learns from the bartender, oh, well, supposedly there's some guy named Decker in the area, and all the bounty hunters are trying to catch him. So they think for some reason he's going to come through here. So that's why all these people are here. And she expresses her disgust that she doesn't like bounty hunters. And so we cut to Spike, who is in the bathroom and, and hungover, which is fun. Just like him just miserable in the bathroom, complaining that, like, oh man, we were supposed to have an exclusive tip, and yet now look at everybody here. It seems just like, he's hungover and miserable, and the job looks like it's falling apart, and it's just like, poor Spike. He just looks awful. So he's just hanging out, but just bemoaning his fate. And meanwhile, he suggests at least it's maybe better luck than Faye's going to have trying out one of these other restaurants. And we cut to Faye, who's at this like kid-friendly ice cream shop, which is delightful. And it's also hilarious that, of course, that is actually where Decker is. But we get a whole bit of business there where she sees this big tough guy come in, knows that this guy has a snake tattoo, and sees just a little hint of what looks like it could be a snake tattoo just on the top of his chest where his shirt's open. And so she's pretty sure that's him. She goes over to start sweet talking him to get his guard down, and then pulls a gun on him, and she's about to basically say, "I've got you now, Decker." Cut to the guy in the next booth over, who's this little guy he's balding, he's got glasses, he maybe is supposed to look like Woody Allen. He does a little bit, and what a fun choice. Because the thing is, the character of Decker, in terms of plot, is meaningless. He's a MacGuffin. It doesn't matter who he is. The whole point is that he is someone who's stolen a bunch of explosives, and we got to catch him. He doesn't even have... I don't think he even has a whole line of dialogue. He maybe says, "Oh yeah, okay," when Faye tells him to call the cops on this other guy she thinks is Decker. But like, there's no there's no script character to him, right? So all they have to do is just but to have him look the way he does, which is so unexpected, and the humor we get from this whole sequence where he's just eating ice cream and he hears Faye arresting Decker next over, and he's like, ooh, ooh, and then she's over with this other guy. He's like, "I saw your dragon tattoo," and he's like, "Oh," and he looks down at the dragon tattoo on his arm, is like, "Oh no." And just, it's fun. It's fun having him be this little nerdy guy, but still in like the ripped denim jacket, heavy metal aesthetic that we're playing with in this session. And then, of course, as he is basically making himself scarce, Faye realizes, "Hey, wait a minute, that might be him. So who are you? And what's up with this tattoo?" Pulls it open. And it's this cutesy, like, romantic illustration of an eel. And the guy's like, "I got a thing for eels." And it's, like, we're not here to kink shame exactly, but that's pretty weird. And it's like, it's one of the more non-standard sorts of things. And so Faye is frustrated, but chasing out after this guy. But this is where, I don't think we had actually learned yet that he was carrying explosives, but this is where we do, because she's chasing him in her little zip craft, and he tosses out this little 2-chamber vial back at her, and when it hits her ship, it blows it half up. And so she is stranded, and he gets away. But she's the one that's got eyes on him. She sees his ship, she knows what he looks like. Nobody else does, apparently. And so, in the meantime, we're back at this restaurant where Spike has pretty much given up on the bounty. He orders a prairie oyster, which is basically like, it's an egg, and it's a hangover remedy with, so it looks like, maybe tequila or vodka or some other clear alcohol, and an egg yolk, and then like hot sauce and stuff like that as a hangover remedy. And so there's a great sequence where some bounty hunters are harassing the waitress, and VT goes over to start beating them up to protect the girl, because she's cool like that. And then they get into a whole big fight, and this is all happening behind Spike as he is very carefully trying to separate the egg yolk from the egg white, sitting at the bar for his prairie oyster. Um, it's a little bit of a shame. It's one of the elements that, we've talked about there being occasional elements in this show that don't age super well. So the Mexican stereotypes as these bounty hunters is not great, but it's like, all things considered, it's a relatively minor thing, but yeah, it's just like, oh, yeah, okay, well, some more of that. We didn't really need that, but okay. Um, so, in any event, though, we have, it continues this fighting. VT is, she's tough, so she's in the fight with them, but then they bump into Spike, and it spills his egg yolk onto his crotch. And so at this point, he starts engaging with the fight. And we've seen him fight enough now that it's fun watching him in a mood where he's not feeling good. He's tired. He doesn't want to be doing this, but he's just doing the fight anyway. And it's just this most like, instead of having fun the way he sometimes does. But in the meantime, they manage to scare away these bounty hunters. And this is where we have VT and Spike kind of connect a little bit. She observes that this prairie oyster that he's ordered she only ever knew one other person who ordered those, and it was her husband, and doesn't share any more detail. But she talks about hating bounty hunters, thinking bounty hunters are the lowest scum of the earth. And Spike, obviously, he likes her, and so doesn't want to ruin anything. So he just gives no response to that. But in the meantime, though, we have, let's see, and he learns at this point, when we have these same three old guys that we've seen a couple of times now come in, and they try to collect the bet by guessing her name. And it's funny that they don't even guess. It's like they guess Adrian. It's like, it doesn't even start with V. And so Spike is interested, and he's going to maybe make a guess. But this is the point where he gets contacted by Jet, who's heard from Faye about the, losing the bounty, but knowing what the ship looks like now. And so hearing on the radio that he's a bounty hunter, VT does not reassess her opinion of bounty hunters, but instead just, expresses disgust at Spike, tells him that she won't take his money, he won't take his bet, and won't pay for his drink anymore either. So he's like, oh well. But then as he leaves, this is another example of a great detail in this episode, is the bounty hunters that he chased away vandalize his ship. Because again, it's an illustration of something that I think is often left out of shows like this, which is that there are consequences to all of these things. Like, yes, these were bad guys, but you beat them up and chase them away, they're still mad. Even if they're too scared to engage you personally, So we have Spike just having a very bad day. Briefly lightened up by meeting VT, who's a cool person, but then having that turn sour because she hates bounty hunters. In the meantime, though, we start to get to see that VT's dislike of bounty hunters obviously comes from a very personal place, but what's going on there is it may be a little bit more complicated. So VT, despite her frustration, does see Spike hitchhiking, and her cat likes him, and so and she likes him too, despite her proclamation. So she decides, okay, I'll give you a ride. And this is where it's like, and can you give my friend Faye a ride too? So they're both getting the ride. But this is where, so VT learns all about who this Decker guy is and what he's doing, but not the explosives part. So after she drops them off back at the Bebop, she hears from, and we get this delightful sequence where she's talking on like the Space Ham radio, Space CB radio with all of her other trucker buddies, people like Love Machine and Sneaky Snake and Spider Mike, about like, oh, one of her friends got in a hit and run with Decker, who she recognizes because she heard the description of the ship from Faye. And so she's thinking, I know where this guy is now. And her immediate response is to basically try to find him and chase him down. And gonna let the bounty hunters know. And so, despite her insistence that she hates bounty hunters, that they're so low and everything like that, she seems remarkably on board now, right? What's going on there? I think that's like, we're like, that's interesting. But it's also just delightful, her meeting all of these other colorful truckers who each in their own sort of cab of their space truck have all sorts of fancy decorations around them where they've made their little cockpit seem like home for them. And like one guy has a whole bunch of little stuffed animals, and one guy has it just, dressed up like a Chinese restaurant or something. And it's just wonderful. There's so many great little details in this whole sequence. And we've got the heavy metal music playing in the background. It's great stuff, great stuff. So in any event, though, VT finds Decker, chases him into this little mine. It's like an asteroid mine. And she calls Spike, but unfortunately misses his response where he says, "Don't chase him, he's carrying explosives." So they are in pursuit as well, but it's all very dangerous now. And then sure enough, Decker tries to elude VT by tossing more explosives back, but the whole mine is unstable. He ends up blowing himself up, or like wrecking himself in a cave-in, even though the rest of his truck is still there. But VT is stuck, and so Faye and Spike have to come in and try to rescue him. But the risk here is they can't leave this whole truckload of explosives there, because it could literally, it's enough to just completely detonate the entire mine, which could be disastrous not only for whoever is actually present there, but also theoretically for other people. And so we've got to get it out, got to get explosives out. How do we get them out? And it's a whole bit where they hook his truck up to VT's ship, and then there's a cave-in, and there's a whole bit where we have to use some of the explosives to clear a cave-in so they can get out. And all of this is just a lot of action that doesn't require beat-by-beat explanation necessarily, but there's some cool stuff in there just when they're all actually working together now. Spike has to do a no-suit spacewalk to get, to basically shoot out this pod to carry the explosives to the cave-in, but then he gets over to VT's ship, and there's this great sequence where he almost makes it, but then everything shifts and he's pulled farther away. There's one little science detail, like the fact that he could survive in vacuum for a minute or so is actually realistic. But you actually wouldn't, we see him put in earplugs and then take a deep breath like, but that's actually not what you would want to do, because you would not be able to hold the pressure in your lungs. So you would actually probably want to exhale, is my understanding. But it's very cool that when he's pulled away, he actually uses his gun to sort of propel himself back in the other direction, but not gracefully. Like it's awkward. He's having to try to, do it, and it spins him around and stuff like that. And it's just this great sequence. In the meantime, we have, Faye having to very carefully manipulate these giant awkward pincers on her ship to try to, take one of the explosives out. It's all just fun. And we have VT, who, despite being tough, this is a little more than she bargained for. But they do all get out, and as part of getting out, we see that this locket she has is floating around, and we see that Spike sees it open. And so as we're finishing up, he knows her name. It's Victoria Terpsichore. And how did he know? Well, because he sees in the locket a picture of her with her husband, who he recognizes as a legendary bounty hunter, now dead, apparently. And so it's a very wonderful, sweet finish to this whole thing of like, now we can see where she's got this love-hate thing with bounty hunters, right? You know, she loves him, except also she lost him because of his dangerous profession, and so it's wonderful that she offers him the big stack of cash we saw, but he takes just one, and says the rest is for her husband because he could use another prairie oyster up in heaven, and it's just this whole episode. VT is such a fun character, and all the detail of all of these other space truckers, and it's such kind of a sweet story in the end. And Decker is so ridiculous, even though like there's no reason for him to even have any character at all, other than being just a generic bad guy archetype. But instead, they make him this weird little nervous, sweaty, nerdy guy, and he's lots of fun to watch in that regard, even before he blows himself up. It's just, there's lots of silliness in this episode, and it's also sweet, and it's wonderful. It's one of my favorite episodes. So I'm gonna go ahead and call it here then. I'll just actually mention one little bit of trivia is that VT is apparently also the initials of the very first woman to ever set foot in space, Valentina Tereshkova. Lots of other, various music references and stuff too, but I'm not going to go into all of those. But so next week, we're going to be talking about next week is the Extra Life game. And so I won't be doing the Cowboy Bebop rewatch next week, but in 2 weeks, I'll continue with Waltz for Venus. And so we'll do that. But in the meantime, I hope I'll still be doing 5 more minutes. I'll be discussing and recapping how the Extra Life game is going. And so in the meantime, I'll talk to you all tomorrow for 5 more minutes.